All right, QA saves the day. Tips and tricks every testing hero needs. My name is Preston Betro. I'm a customer success manager here at mabl, focusing on being a customer advocate, right? Helping customers with their implementation of mabl so that they can achieve success in the short and long term. Picked up a few things along the way over my 2.5 years here at mabl, and I really look forward to sharing those with you today.
Hey everyone, I'm Cornell. Thank you again for joining us. I'm a customer support representative here at mabl. I've been here about a year. I like to take my job a bit further than just, helping with the debugging and configuration of tests, but also trying to be a voice for our customers and really driving home their problems.
Key objectives for today that Cornell and I will be focusing on. I'll highlight mine first, and then Cornell will highlight his. Workspace organization best practices. One of the keys to achieving quality with mabl. I'll be talking about how best to go about that approach so that you can optimize your teamwork to make that automation dream work. Really applying to both new and existing users of mabl. So whether you're on one side or the other, hopefully you can get something out of this.
Right, and for me, I'm going to be covering optimizing your test configuration and debugging. So we're going to be going in depth to learn how to utilize the trainer functions that'll make it a breeze to navigate through those short and lengthy tests, and then also understanding the importance of your application state when creating those tests and setting up guidelines that ensure your success.
All right, let's dive in. To start here, since we have wide variety of levels of expertise, levels of familiarity with mabl, I think it's useful to call out some of the components that we're working with here and how they each fit into the greater mabl puzzle. On the right here, you can see the hierarchy of terminology, starting with the workspace as the building blocks. All right, the workspace itself houses environments, applications, plans, tests, and some of the other things that you see here. But what we're going to be focusing on is highlighted in pink: plans, tests, labels, descriptions, right? Briefly going over each one. Plans, think of those as an ordered group of tests that hold the configuration for how mabl carries out automation. Tests, the functionality itself that you are testing. Labels, a word or phrase that you use to describe certain tests and plans for the purposes of organization and some other important things like deployments that we'll talk about. And then finally, descriptions, a brief summary, pretty straightforward, and we'll touch upon how that's implemented as well. As a CSM, what I often hear from new and existing users: how do we properly organize our workspace? Are we doing it correctly? Is there one right way to do it? How do we know that our plans and tests, right? How do we know which ones fit where? And how do we build that for scale? The short answer that I typically give is it depends. With testing comes subjectivity, right? We all have different applications. We all have different processes of development and methodologies, different team structures. The thing about mabl that I'm sure anyone who has been using it for even a short period of time would understand that it is moldable. It is configurable. It is meant to be each and every team's own flavor of mabl automation for your process and your team. And although these best practices might sound simple on the surface, taking the time to dig into them will help you lay this groundwork so that you can have a solid foundation to build your automation on with mabl. All right. As a team, setting clear goals, aligning on naming conventions, and utilizing the capabilities of plans is the jumping off point, as well as a point to revisit, right, for new users and existing users alike, to get the most out of your mabl testing. When it comes to setting goals and milestones, those of you that have gone through onboarding with myself, I typically ask, what are your goals in the first 30, 60, and 90 days, 6 months, and then 1 year? a tall order, I think, for anyone to get a clear answer to, right? It's I think a fair question, but a difficult one. And never do I expect to have full answers here, because no strategy is set in stone. No strategy is fully fleshed out. No strategy is perfect, and no strategy will remain the same either. It's a constant iterative process, which is why it's so important to set it early on. Even if you don't have a full, even if there's things that are X factors down the line that you know are going to influence it, taking the steps to set some milestones, set some type of strategy, right, will beget the process of fully realizing this in a more successful way, right? As your application grows, as your team grows, as mabl changes and grows and adds new functionality, all of these things will impact that approach, right? But that's how it should be. And really what the goal here is that it's reflective of what works for your team, right? But we'll get to that in just a second. Where we see a lot of success happen with my customers and with the other CSM's customers, as well as alignment between quality assurance and with development. The more communication that happens between them both, the more seamless the process is, the less backtracking is done, and the more forward progress is made, right? The closer they can be, whether that is just that healthy communication of, hey, this feature is coming out, these are the areas that it might impact, or a really integrated shift left approach where the devs are working in mabl just as much as QA, testing on features, testing on their branches earlier on in that process. Right? It doesn't have to be anything specific. It's just that level of alignment and communication is really a good place to start. And then when it comes to what approach looks like, what a good one looks like, what we see is a phased approach is typically one that works because it allows you to segment goals in a way that you can always iterate on, like I mentioned before. Right? What are some examples of, or actually, let me pause for a second here. One thing Natalie mentioned from NCR in the keynote speech is to start with the areas that add the most value, right? Can mean a variety of things, a lot of subjectivity when it comes to testing, as I mentioned, right? But in that first phase, which we see each phase going from 1 to 3 months, give or take, is focusing on, in phase 1, what are those most value add areas to test first, to get coverage, to make sure that there are no bugs, right? Catching bugs is one extremely valuable thing, but also training the team. Having the team get comfortable and confident in mabl is also a huge value add. So we see different versions of this, whether that's just setting up a smoke test suite, getting all the basic things covered first, so that the team really feels comfortable in mabl, or whether that is tackling the most complex areas of functionality so that those business or those high value areas of the product that have business impacts are covered tightly, right? Could be anything, but knowing that approach and knowing where you want to go is really where you want to start, and then revisit. Now we're going to go on to the second, which is naming conventions. I was talking with an individual earlier today that mentioned that his team was one of their focal points with onboarding new customers is making sure that everyone is clear of how they're naming things. And I could not agree more, because as a team, leading them from a point of consistency, right, is what's going to keep that alignment throughout your journey of using mabl. Plans, focusing on the area of functionality or module, right? Keeping that context of how it relates to other plans in mind, and the environment that it's testing against as well. An example here, application name dash module or feature is a good place to start, but there are different versions of this. Labels are also very important, very, very important with plans, because they're also going to allow you to kick off certain plans based on certain deployments. Some examples of that are search based on functionality, or something like smoke or regression based on test suite. And then descriptions, some type of description from a summary perspective, anecdotes, the purpose, right? And then you can see an example of this on the right. We're going to continue here just for the sake of time, but these slides will be available afterwards. naming conventions for tests. Instead of the larger features and modules, for tests, you're going to name them based on the sub features. What functionality is it specifically covering and why is it testing that, which will go into the description. The labels themselves are meant for organization, less than a kind of a functional thing that it was for plans in terms of kicking off tests with deployments, but still very important. Make it easy for your team members to find the test that they need to work on, right? And then have that be part of a definition of what it does. So it makes things easier, makes the machine more well-oiled. That's what these naming conventions, excuse me, are going to do. And you can see some examples there. Number 3, plan configuration, right? Now we talked about setting of goals. We talked about getting everyone on the same page about how things are named and understood. All right, now let's go into how are we organizing this practically, right? And knowing the scope of your tests and your plans are going to allow you to do that. All right, the plans themselves are really the backbone of your test suite in mabl. They hold a lot of power. So thinking critically about that scope is going to inform you as to what you should put in the next plan and the next, and how from a higher level, if you're zooming up, how they all work together to test on a certain environment for that certain application, right? And then you can go back down to then tweak and tailor from there, right? Ultimately, it should align with your app process and priorities, right? So grab a whiteboard, a piece of paper, map everything out. And this is why the goals are so important with conceptualizing that strategy, right? Important to note within plans is the triggers, the stages, and the environments, right? The environments you're testing again, how those relate. So think about what data you need to set up and clean up, how many concurrent users you can have signing into your application at once, what authorizations are used to sign into certain tests within a plan, what browsers you're testing against, and what the functionality is within those that may impact different browsers differently. Taking advantage of stages will allow you to configure them in a way where they are playing in the cloud in such a fashion that runs smoothly and consistently and won't result in any false negatives, right? Now, on the right here, you see a classic example of a data setup, run the regression suite, data user cleanup with some, with some tests in there. That's a standard setup that we see. But again, making sure that the entire team knows how to use these functionalities, right? I'm showing right here. Clicking the stage option once you go into edit a plan, you'll see this screen on the right here where you can set, am I running this in parallel or in sequence? Should I always have these tests run, even if the ones before it fail? Does that matter? Right? Is that important? And then overriding certain things like browsers and data tables and things like that, right? So asking yourself as a team, right, how are these tests interacting with one another? How are they going to play out in the cloud? And ultimately what we're doing here is building for scale, right? Each workspace is unique, and obviously so will the approach. Mabl is flexible, right? Doesn't matter where you're at in your Mabl journey. It's never too early. It's never too late to evaluate your strategy, your process, so that it impacts your business and the quality for your users in a positive way. And really, one of the biggest things to emphasize here is team alignment, right? Getting everyone on the same page moving forward so that this can be carried out successfully. All right, thank you, everyone. And up next is Cornell.
Thank you, Preston. All right, hi, everyone. So as we discuss optimizing test configuration and debugging, we'll be looking at a few tips that, those Mabl members such as myself are using every day to make that whole entire process a bit smoother. My goal is to highlight a few core tools to Mabl and express how a support rep like myself is using them to achieve success. So as we discuss this, a couple of things we'll dive into are navigating through test in the trainer, understanding and verifying your application state, setting some clear guidelines for your test in Mabl, understanding the different methods of running your Mabl test in the cloud, and then as well as the hidden gem to me, which is the Chrome DevTools and how we can use Mabl within DevTools. So as a support rep here at Mabl, I'm often bouncing in between multiple test cases at once. Some of those test cases are often short, up to 30 test steps. but a lot of them are pretty long, 100 to 150 steps, and that can take some time. When troubleshooting user issues, there are a few trainer tools to me that help me save a ton of time, such as playthrough here, highlight element, and move cursor here. Utilizing these tools allows me to bounce between a numerous tests in a small period of time, getting right to the juice and right to the trouble step and when I'm working. When running through tests in the trainer, if you've noticed mabl is having a hard time locating an element or say a simple interaction has failed, I often try to retrain my target element and then just replay those steps again to see if that will resolve my issue on the spot. Not only are these tools great for navigating through the test, but they're also super beneficial when you're troubleshooting overall. Me personally, I like to manually step through a good amount of the steps once I've verified that they work when run ad hoc and in a plan. Once I've verified my test steps, I try to save time by manually stepping through those and just getting right back to the step that I'm focused on. And that's one of those best practices that I would be recommending, which is manually stepping forward once you verify that the steps within your test are all behaving as expected. And then we can move forward. Another key part of this is verifying your application state. It's always super important to ensure your application is in the right state, whether you're building out or debugging your test cases. And one thing I would say here is to just keep an eye out for the little things. So when we think about application state, it's easy to overlook some of the smaller things that occur in our application, such as dialog pop-ups or simple pop-ups that happen on interactions, such as confirming or closing out something, and other little behaviors that we may not have accounted for when writing our test the first time through, or when they're added down the line. For many user issues that I've run into, they're usually related in some way to overall application state. And examples of this can include mabl trying to click an element before the page is fully loaded, or maybe mabl is trying to interact with an element that's covered because a drop down or another element didn't finish moving out the way. So a great way to work around this and verify your application state is by using assertions. Assertions are a great way to verify the right thing has occurred. So when I'm debugging a lot of user test cases, I like to add assertions in for my own benefit, just to ensure that I've checked that we've arrived at the right page, all my elements are present. And it's also super important to explore different assertion types. So beyond just using the is present or is not present, I try to go deeper and look for those contained assertions, and also try to explore different attributes that you can be targeting when working in mabl test. For your fails test runs, I would recommend that you look beyond just that failed test step, and that's also a super important part of verifying your application state. So when you're running a test and it fails and you go and look at your test output page, I recommend that you want to take a look at least the step before the failure and at least 2 steps before that, while also taking a look at the capture state of the application after the test. Now, these are very easy to overlook, especially the capture state of the application after the test, but they're also super beneficial because if something doesn't behave the way that you've expected it to, then you'll be able to see that right away. You'll call it out and you'll be able to notice what may be causing the issue. For us in the support role, that's also super helpful because a lot of times when one interaction doesn't work, it's usually because another interaction didn't behave the way we expected it to or the way the test was written. So once again, just take a look at the steps before and the capture state after, see if anything looks out of the ordinary. And another really good thing that you can do to verify your application state is to take a look at your application outside of the mabl trainer. So when you're training your test, of course, you're working in Chrome using a Chrome tool. And when you're running the test, I've often seen users create tests in Chrome that only run on IE, or create a test in Chrome that were only running on Safari in the cloud. So one thing that you can do when you're running into issues in the trainer or in the cloud specifically is to complete those same actions manually without the trainer, without mabl, just to ensure that this isn't something that could be going on the back end behind your application. And maybe you can catch that a bit earlier. So once you can verify that everything is working as expected in all those browsers and in your application without mabl, then we can go ahead and take a deeper look and make sure there's not something that's going on our side. Also, as it relates to application state, is setting those guidelines. And in this instance, I'll be discussing configure finds and how it relates to setting those guidelines, kind of making sure that mabl has everything it needs to make sure your test is running the way you intend. So it's definitely important to set some guidelines when creating those tests. Of course, mabl is using machine learning and to create those robust and automated tests. So you don't have to worry about the test failing for the wrong reasons. Where mabl can adapt, it will. However, one way to make your test more reliable and account for some of those unexpected behaviors is to add in a configure find. Existing steps can be modified from wait until steps to configure finds by adding that option under more actions. So let's start by understanding a little bit more about what's going on when mabl is searching for an element. So all the find actions when mabl is actually searching for an element will automatically wait up to 30 seconds for the target to appear. Configure's find steps give you the ability to tell mabl to wait up to 15 minutes for any element to appear. Not only does it's not just about the timing though, because you can actually, now with the recent changes we made, you can also specify specific attributes by setting variables or just writing them right in to help mabl figure out exactly what you're looking for and why you're looking for that. Without the use of configure finds, like I said, we'll automatically wait 30 seconds to find an element. And that's for a normal, that's for like a normal ad hoc run. If you're running these tests in the plan, maybe we'll extend that to about 60 seconds. Timing aside, configure finds can also be a great alternative to using a custom find, as I mentioned, by searching for those custom attributes that you can now write in. All right, so another important thing that I want to discuss with you guys is just understanding the different methods of running your test in the cloud. So let's just discuss. You have triggering your plan from the UI. You can trigger an ad hoc run from the UI, and you can trigger a test from the CLI. In my opinion, for myself, as a support rep, I see myself triggering a ton of ad hoc runs. Number one, because I'm mainly troubleshooting and just diving right back to that issue and want to confirm that my fix actually worked or didn't work so I can continue working. I try to stay away from the plan runs because, like I said, I'm just troubleshooting. So usually I'm focused on a specific test step and test case. However, on a broad spectrum and overall, just thinking about all the benefits that come with the plan run, I would say that running your test from the plan is the best option. The reason for that is because plans contain all the parameters that the test needs to run. So, and also plans allow you to decide if you want to run multiple tests in parallel or in sequential. Not only that, but plans also allow you access to auto healing, which helps mabl adapt to those changes that are happening in your test as every day. Now, triggering an ad hoc run from the UI, like I said, is something that I'm personally doing a lot as a support rep because of all the troubleshooting I'm doing, and I'm constantly going back and forth between tests. The thing about ad hoc runs is that they do come with some limitations. So with ad hoc runs, the auto healing logic will not be updated for find elements. And on Chrome execution, step tracers will not be generated. Speed index will not be updated. So we won't be able to check and see how long it takes for your web page to be displayed. And then finally, there is you do have the ability to trigger those tests from the CLI. And the way that I look at it is, after using your CLI tool to create and run your tests locally, you're going to want to, go back and run those tests in the cloud to actually get access to all that mabl juiciness that we discussed. Those screenshots, the DOM snapshots, taking a look at network activity to understand what's going on and kind of calling out any major errors. So finally, a bit of a hidden gem to me that I've been using since I came to mabl about a year ago and I use every day now is the Chrome DevTools and mabl in Chrome DevTools. So while editing your tests, of course, you can, especially if you're looking for the cause of a failure, definitely try opening up DevTools. You can take a look at console errors, search the DOM, verify your XPath or CSS, but mainly I would use it for looking at those more complex XPaths and viewed page load time in the network tab. Of course, it gives you a lot of capabilities when you're debugging and editing your tests overall. In some cases, we may just need to take a look at the elements. Sometimes when you're working with dynamic elements, it's not until you actually inspect the element in Chrome DevTools that you'll notice that the ID is changing every single test run, or certain attributes that you may not mabl may not be picking up and showing to you in the test, the step information, you can just dive right into Chrome DevTools and gather all the information you need about those elements. So for me personally, DevTools is definitely super useful, especially working with JavaScript as well. Sometimes I'll actually work on my snippets there and just try to catch those console errors prematurely. And I'll just pass it back over to Preston.
All right, Cornell, thank you so much for that. And that's it for today, folks. Thank you for coming to QA Saves the Day. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to myself and or Cornell, as well as our support chat, where both of us live practically. So please let us know if anything comes up.
Thanks, Cornell and Preston. So it looks like we have just a couple minutes for some quick questions here. Again, you can submit those in the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. So we have some lined up. I'll start with, when do people typically integrate CI/CD in the phased approach that you mentioned?
Great question. So like I mentioned in that section, a lot of things are subjective here. So I wouldn't say that there's a perfect right way to do it necessarily, but one thing that we see among successful customers is once they have a good foundation of tests in mabl, that's when we typically see them starting to integrate CI/CD. Once the team is comfortable, first of all, the tests are running consistently and reliably so that if new code is pushed, it's pushed to tests that we know will cover that functionality adequately. And then the third part here is also, where are the devs testing? Are they testing as a part of that process as well? So obviously the earlier that you can get that level of coverage, the better, but typically we see that within the first 1 to 4 months.